Joining us now on the program, Joel and Natasha, host and co-host of America's Roundtable radio program and co-founder of the International Leaders Summit. Joel, Natasha, good morning, friends. Good to see you. What an eventful 24 hours we have had. What's your take?
Indeed a good morning to you, Gerard. Thank you so much for having us on SuperTalk, Mississippi.
You bet. Thank you.
Well, thank you for hosting us this morning. I mean, it's bad news, actually. Russia invaded Ukraine, basically, from the north, south, and east. And there's attacks going via land, air, and sea. And it's not just anymore eastern Ukraine. Actually, they took over just an hour ago or so. They took over the Kiev's airport, so major airport. And they're so close to Kiev. They're 20 kilometers from Kiev, which means the seat of the government, which means Ukraine itself. It's not anymore just eastern Ukraine. It's the country, sovereign country in Europe today. I mean, this is like the largest post-World War II war at this stage.
Yeah, it's very disturbing, and so I got to ask you guys, am I being unfair to just question where our president is? It just seems to me like that within a few minutes after this thing was launched, after the invasion took place, and the administration yesterday retermed it to be an invasion. Shouldn't we have seen and heard something? I mean, it's going to be more than 12 hours later before we get anything from our president.
Indeed, this was all unavoidable. I mean, it was avoidable, meaning we as a nation could have taken steps much earlier in ensuring that there was greater security for Ukraine and for our NATO allies. However, this goes back all the way to January 2021. When Biden then basically stopped the Keystone XL project, making actually Putin stronger from an energy leverage point of view. Then the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, which communicated to the world that America is weak. After 20 years, we left our NATO allies just hanging out there and basically fleeing Afghanistan in that context, as well as the fact that our U.S. southern border is not protected. In fact, Putin and our adversaries around the world are taking note of that. If we have Russians and 2 Yemeni terrorists that were on the terror watch list actually captured at the U.S. southern border, what does it say about American leadership? So our adversaries are noticing that. And just a few moments ago, China actually came in support of Russia by saying, folks, we're standing with Russia, no sanctions for Russia. In fact, this is all being blamed upon the West and NATO and America. So a weak U.S. leadership has certainly fueled this process.
Yeah, interesting point, and I totally agree, though the administration really just shies away from any notion that the debacle that occurred in Afghanistan and other domestic policy with respect to our border, energy policy, which is completely rooted in climate change, has any or was any factor in what we're witnessing with Russia and Ukraine. I just don't believe that. I think Putin is a very savvy leader that understands what's going on, taking stock of that, and he's acting accordingly. He's pushing the envelope as far as he can, clearly, and we should not be surprised that he did this. He made it clear. He's made clear for some time that he wants to reconstitute the old USSR. I think he's been pretty clear about that, is he not?
Right. I mean, we gave him a green light, basically. If you look at the analogy of the Balkan conflict, the pretext was the same. It was, Serbia, at that time, Serbia's ethnic minorities in Croatia that are under attack, which wasn't the truth. I mean, they created a perception of ethnic conflict, of ethnic tensions in order to attack. So at that time, State Secretary Baker said, we don't have a dog in that war. So year after Serbia was all over at that time, or Yugoslavia, as they call themselves. So we see the same situation today. So Russia is protecting Russia's minority in Ukraine, which is not really under any kind of attack. So they created ethnic tensions in order to provide a pretext for an attack. And in less than 24 hours, spokespersons from the White House, Psaki, said, we are not going to send U.S. forces to help Ukraine. I beg your pardon. I mean, we're saying we don't have a dog in that fight again. And the problem is that also, I wanted to remind our listeners and your listeners, Gerard, that if they want to go to check one very interesting YouTube video, and that is when Obama is saying to President Medvedev at that time, which was caught on tape, he was whispering to him, he didn't know that was him on the microphone, when he said, say to Putin, these are my last elections.
Yes.
Tell him that I'll be more flexible after that. I mean, American president is more loyal to Russian president than to American people. I mean, this is amazing. I mean, this is unbelievable.
Yeah, it is crazy. And of course, the concern I have is that after he is able to occupy, or at least feels confident in his ability to occupy Ukraine, that he just keeps pushing forward. And the next thing we know, he's in Poland, and that's extremely disturbing. And this is gonna cause NATO to really have to figure out what they want to do. I mean, we'll put them in quite the conundrum to, I think, come up with a response and unify around a response. It's going to be extremely difficult. If it's just Ukraine, I guess you could maybe make the argument that it's really not something that we should be involved in, but it's the fear of going further, which just kind of opens up that door for that, it seems. And this guy's emboldened, and he seems to me to be crazy, honestly, Putin. It's just unstable at a minimum.
Yeah, in fact, as we look at NATO forces that have gone over to the Baltics, we were just in a conversation with the former intelligence head of Estonia yesterday, who was the Secretary General of the Foreign Ministries of Estonia, and he communicated too that the sanctions from the European side and the West has been very weak. So rather than pushing all these troops up front, we could have addressed this issue months ago, years ago, with stronger sanctions. And in fact, the European Union today is actually countries like Italy, Germany, Cyprus, and Hungary are pushing for lesser EU sanctions on Russia. And they're not going to do anything with the SWIFT issue either. And if we are supposed to really address the problems at hand, they should target Putin's oligarchs, those that are his closest allies, and basically the United Kingdom, the City of London, which is separate from London itself, the capital, should take greater notice. And also, unfortunately, we have enabled kleptocracy in Eastern Europe and primarily in Moscow. And the enablers have blood on their hands.
Yeah. And, of course, the SWIFT system based in Belgium, and it is the interbank financial system, if you will. And it's being reported that the EU won't get on board with imposing sanctions on Russia in terms of prohibiting them from participating in the SWIFT systems because Russia owes them so much money. They've gotten in debt to them so much as Russia to the EU that they wouldn't have a way to pay their principal and interest on the debt they owe to these European nations. So that was poor policy on their part, honestly, to trust those guys and accept their investment. So I don't know, to loan those guys money and just think you're going to get paid back without any strings attached or without any interruption in that while you've watched the ruble plummet in value and the Russian stock market, their markets as well, and really a very weak economy when you consider the size of that nation geographically and in terms of people and the resources they have. It's no bigger than the economy of the state of Texas, which is incredible, which I think is a function of very poor centralized near communistic still policy, I think, in place, and lots of cronyism and corruption. So we got a break. You guys can hang around.
Yeah.
You can hang around.
Right. Yes,
right.
we can.
We'll come back and
thank you so much. Yeah.
We'll come back and get you guys to respond. Thanks so much for joining us, Natasha and Joel, on Middays. We'll be right back. Middays, we've got Natasha and Joel on the line. They are host and co-host of America's Roundtable radio program and co-founder of the International Leaders Summit. So we were just talking about the instability of Vladimir Putin, and I think really testing our president, having seen his war on fossil fuels, his the debacle and the ordeal with Afghanistan, which I think most, if not all, would agree was extremely poorly handled, and just a person who projects weakness. And I think Putin feels like when you got someone like that at the helm, it emboldens him to some extent. Your thoughts?
Right. Actually, as you say, there's a peace through strength policy, which Reagan introduced and Trump followed with it as well. So strong U.S. in the world on economic, military, security front. So that was a peace through strength. We went to war through weakness, as you mentioned. Yeah. And actually, it's us. When you look at the history, it was always America that came into rescue in Europe. During World War II, during the Balkan conflict, actually, U.S. got involved in 1995, starting to bomb. So actually, if America got involved in 1991, perhaps we would have avoided 200,000 people being dead, because Europe was never unanimous. So at that time, Europe was very, like a huge inertia. Today, we have similar situations. So it's not that we need to get involved militarily, but just the threat of military action without saying we don't have a dog in that fight, meaning we should have been saying we're going to get involved if Russia crosses the border, we're going to get involved with all a full military force. At the other side, we don't have the Europe that is unanimous. Austria, Italy, and Hungary are lobbying for limited sanctions on Russia. Switzerland doesn't want to introduce any sanctions, and Switzerland is known for having also a massive amount of illicit enrichment or ill-gotten gains that are coming from Russia. And also Gazprom's company is also registered in Russia. Gazprom is owner of the Nord Stream Pipeline 2, which is actually providing 50% of natural gas imports to Germany, which was halted in the meantime. But so we have different players. So if Europe is not going to do anything, and we're saying we're not sending our military troops, war already happened, so what's next? Deterrence, it was too little too late, and this shouldn't have happened. So now we have to actually look at Europeans are waking up, I believe, and they see, this is it. So now actually the sanctions that have to be imposed are all possible things that they can do. Freeze all accounts. They should have done it earlier. Block financial transaction payments, block any exports coming out. But obviously, whoever imposes sanctions is going to be hurt. So it's the two-way road, and we know that. So, but sooner we start doing it, less damage we will cause.
Natasha, I know you come from the region. Have you been in communication with any contacts in the area, Ukraine or around the area, that have informed you on the ground what's going on?
Right. Actually, I'm following the news from Eastern Europe, basically in local languages. So I see instantly what's going on. And they just also mentioned that the Russians are in Chernobyl now. They don't know what that exactly means at this stage, but obviously there's a risk of using nuclear waste in that area. And also we're receiving messages from Ukraine, and actually they're saying first thing to do is declare no fly zone, as it was done earlier in the past. We did that. So no fly zone would disable any kind of attack from Russia via drones, via rockets and missiles, and also no helicopters or planes flying above Ukraine. So they said also close any exports, financial transactions, freeze all the assets, do anything that's possible from the West. I mean, they're actually calling on all of us to help out in this situation because there's no other way.
Yeah, and Vladimir Putin himself personally is a man of enormous wealth. It seems like we should figure out how we can perhaps block him and cut off his use of that wealth somehow to affect him personally.
Yes, indeed, Gerard. In fact, we know all the key oligarchs, the top 5, the top 10, the top 50 that are surrounding Putin. And in fact, the city of London could make a decision right now, but they are certainly not moving to take those actions. And if they are doing so, it's not with a principled resolve. And so from the European side, we know that Bank Austria, one of the banks, Raiffeisen Bank, has significant accounts based out of Moscow. And with, it looks at it as a lucrative marketplace for them. So these banks continue to work in Russia. And if we wanted to do so, we should have done that months ago, not now.
Yeah,
we should have sent a signal to Vladimir Putin 6, 7, 8 months ago when we knew that they were ramping things up. We gave Putin quite a bit of time, considerable time. And at this stage here, as Natasha Srdoc mentioned, it's too little, too late because the tanks are rolling in. And actually, in reality, what leverage does the European Union have? Not much. 40% of the EU gas supply comes from Russia. Germany depends on 50% of its natural gas from Russia. And I'd like to read this quote from Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, the Christian Democratic Union's leader who succeeded Merkel. She said, I quote, "I'm so angry at ourselves for our historical failure. After Georgia, Crimea, and Donbass, we have not prepared anything that would have really deterred Putin," unquote. And from the FT, Simon Cooper writes, and I quote, "I hope we'll crack down on lawyers, public relation firms, private schools, estate agents, and political parties, not only in London, who live off the Putinist elite's plunder," unquote. And I would like to add think tanks, even in Washington, D.C.
It just seems like when you discuss that, I wasn't aware that. I appreciate that, Joel, that you've got banks in Austria, a U.S. ally, that are hosting accounts of big oligarchs in Moscow, that our president, our country, would have taken a lead and perhaps worked with Austria or done the research. They have the intelligence to figure out where these guys have their money. Let's go hit them in the pocketbook personally, and sort of encouraged, at least, if not demand, that they take action to freeze their accounts.
Right. I mean, Austrian banks were the first banks that enter Eastern Europe, including Russia. They established themselves, and they are actually major power. So Austrian banks in Russia and Eastern Europe. And at one point of time, even WikiLeaks published. Actually, those communication between embassies. It was known that Raiffeisen Bank, which is now actually in big trouble because of having so much exposure to Russia, they were actually selling. Being financial intermediary in selling arms via Russia to North Korea. So you can find these things. I mean, basically intelligence, individuals in the establishment know about these things, that Austria is a problem with banking sector in Eastern Europe that is laundering money via Austria and Liechtenstein. We have some of that money pouring into Washington, D.C. as well. And that's a problem. We're coming back to the swamp, which has to deal with these things in a principled way. Not it's me, it's you, it's left, it's right, it's, whose fault is it, but we have to do it in a principled way. And also, let me also bring another thing historic, that there was Budapest Agreement in 1995, where they actually, Ukraine accepted to get nuclear weapons out of Ukraine in a trilateral agreement between America, Russia, and Ukraine, because they said, we are going to protect you. So we're never going to attack Ukraine. So Ukraine accepted and said, okay, we are going to give away all our nuclear weapons that are in the country because America will protect us, Russia will protect us. We're going to be, a country living in peace in the future. That was Boris Yeltsin at that time, Clinton. and the local leader. But that's what brings it up today, because trust. Yeah. How do we trust? We can't trust Putin. We can't trust authoritarians in this world. We can't commit to something knowing that they are not going to actually honor their word.
Right.
And we don't know who's going to be inheriting that power.
Exactly. That's well said, Natasha. Really appreciate your insight and analysis. And Joel, Natasha, we're out of time, but we thank you, as always, for joining us here on Middays. Very informative. Appreciate your perspective, and I'm sure we'll be talking to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gerard, for having us.
You bet. Middays, we'll be right back after this break, everyone. Stay with us.